Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahidam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Valita Shri Vishakavitam Shyam. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagat Pathe Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namastute Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sutadevi Pranamami Hari Priye Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Yantah Pravishya Mama Vacham Mam Prasuktam Sanjeevaya Takila Shakti Darasvadhamna Anyam Shahasta Charana Shravanat Vagadim Pranannamo Bhagavate Purushaya Tudhim Svasyastu Vishwasya Kalah Prasidatam Deyantu Bhutani Shivam Mitodiya Manascha Badram Vajatata Doksha Jayveshitam Nomati Rajya Haituji. So, I'm very honored to be with all of you, even though I don't see all of you, but I at least can see Jai Jagannath smiling. That's good enough. Please guide me. How shall we do our association? Because I can tell more or less in gist the presentation which I did in ILS. I have the PowerPoint. Of course, in ILS I had 3 sessions, so I can only do maybe overview of what I did there. Or I can get deeper in certain sections, so I can just tell how this whole concept developed, and maybe you can ask the questions in this regard. So please choose what would you like. The presentation is ready. I can, walk you through this presentation very quickly and then let's see. Or I can just talk and explain the basic ideas behind this concept. So, or we can go deeper in some sections of it, whatever you like. Please let me know.
I would suggest a little bit of a hybrid, maybe explaining the motivations and some of the main inspirations and main points behind the presentation, and maybe zooming in on some of those major crises points that we maybe already face or are likely to face, and how to navigate that, because as the environment around us gets more intense, external environment, encountering those internal crises are going to be magnified for us, and we could probably use a lot of guidance how we might successfully navigate the turmoil.
I hope you don't view my presentation as a possible vaccine against the crises.
No, we view it as actual medicine.
Anyway, so I've been in ISKCON long enough to see many crises, including the very dramatic ones, when even very senior devotees would change their views inexplicably from the external point of view, or do something which you would never expect from them. I've seen how less senior devotees struggle sometimes on a different levels of their spiritual development and the different junctions in their spiritual journey. I've seen how devotees sometimes were shaken in their faith. I did have my, share of critical situations. And because I have some sort of scientific background, I was observing all this phenomenon, and I was wondering if it's possible to explain it in a scientific way, what is going on, and why crises are practically inevitable in the spiritual development, which we know as a royal road, smooth way, easy way to Godhead, elevator, don't go through the stairs, you just got right there. And nevertheless, this elevator every now and then halts, and probably because it's Indian elevator and the electricity is being cut off, or some other reason. So basically I was wondering what is going on, and can we more or less scientifically or systematically view different crises and causes for crises. I was reading Madhurya Kadambini, where Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur gives the very elaborate and vivid description of the spiritual development. And I gave several seminars on this topic, especially, of course, on the topic, perhaps the most memorable part of the whole Madhurya Kadambini is his description of different stages of Anishtita Bhajana Kriya, starting with Utsahamai and Ganatarala and so on and so forth. Still, something was lacking in this regard. I gave very elaborate seminar on Manakh Shiksha by Srila Raghunath Das Goswami, where basically in the very first verse he describes, in my humble opinion, the development of the spiritual ego. And this sort of thinking and studying of this literature was coupled with my interest in developmental psychology. I read some books about the development of the child, and ultimately I kind of synthesized these ideas together, and I understood that the development of a devotee is very much similar to the development of the child. This simile is there in many places in Vaishnava literature, like Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he compares Shraddha with a little baby girl, or Srila Prabhupada sometimes calls his disciples as spiritual babies or spiritual children. So I would, dare, or I would be bold enough to suggest that there is some similarity between the development of a child and the development of a beginner devotee, because the processes which take place during the development of a child and the processes which take place during the development of a devotee are somewhat similar, because the development of both the child and the beginning devotee, neophyte devotee, is the development of their ego. The small, small human beings, small baby, while growing, develops an ego. And this ego goes through certain stages. And in the same way, we as devotees developing spiritual ego. This is very clearly stated by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in the very end of Madhurya Kadambini, in the 8th chapter of Madhurya Kadambini, where he says that the development, spiritual development, is the process of development of ahanta and mamata. We know that ego has these two aspects, I and mine, ahanta and mamata. So when you develop your spiritual ego, you develop your spiritual ahanta. I am this and that. From the spiritual point of view, I am spirit soul in the beginning, and this ego is being solidified more and more and more and becomes more concrete. We know that ultimately the crown achievement in the spiritual path is to have completely developed spiritual ego, meaning that I know what is my age in the spiritual world, what is the dress which I dress there, what is my service, all this Ekadasha Bhava stuff. It's basically a description of ego because everything else stems from ego. Ego is the beginning of everything. If you come to a job, then the first thing to a new company, the first thing which they have to tell you who you are. This is your position, and by knowing who you are, you will know what you are supposed to do, what is your relationship with everyone else, and so on and so forth. So ego is a very important concept, and we know that everything in the material world and in the spiritual world has ego. We are personalists, we are not impersonalists, and personalists, they maintain that ego is not necessarily a bad thing, that there is such thing as a spiritual ego, and spiritual ego defines your role in the spiritual world. It defines your service, it defines your mood, because all this Ekadashi Bhava is basically emotions, but you can only experience emotions if your ego is fully mature. The little child has some emotions, but they're very immature emotions. The spiritual emotions is a manifestation of a fully mature spiritual ego. And when I started comparing the crises which a little child goes through while developing his ego, while interacting with the world, I found very interesting parallels, or at least I found that it's an interesting way of looking at the spiritual development. I don't claim that this is something. I don't want to make bombastic statements, but my humble proposal is that if we take this understanding and try to look at the spiritual development from this point of view, we may see something which may escape our attention otherwise, if we don't look in this light. So that's more or less the initial premise of the whole thing. One more very important point which I want to make is that, and it's very, resonates very much with our philosophy, to develop ego, you can only develop healthy ego if you interact with other people, and if you interact in a healthy way, in a proper way with other people. Those who are senior, those who are equal to you, those who are junior to you. You cannot really develop your ego being isolated. If a human baby is, forgotten somewhere in the forest and somehow or other he survives, he will not develop his intelligence, his mind, and his ego. He will be totally, completely, undeveloped human being, even though the potential is there. So, for the development of ego, the normal ego, the material ego, false ego, you need proper association. And again, even false ego may not be such a bad thing. There is a bad false ego and there is good false ego. Like, for example, what is Varnashrama? Varnashrama is nothing but the system which helps human beings to create strong, healthy, false egos. And when you have strong and healthy false ego, then you can overcome false ego and develop your spiritual ego. But if your ego is weak, if you don't know what you're doing, like people in the present day society, modern day society, they don't have ego. They only have egos of consumers. They're very unhealthy personalities. They don't know what to do. They don't know their special talents, special contributions, special gifts which they have. They're completely, totally lost. And they cannot function properly in the world. What to speak about developing something higher. So for healthy development, both material and spiritual, you need healthy association, and that is a very prominent feature of our philosophy, to develop your spiritual identity, spiritual personality, so to speak. You need association. You will never be able to develop spiritually without association. And actually all the problems of immature, undeveloped people is due to the lack of proper association. And the same is true for the devotees. All our problems is due to the lack of proper association. If we have proper association, if this association is nourishing, and if this association is healthy, it helps us to develop our proper spiritual identity, and by helping develop our proper spiritual identity, it will ultimately contribute to our success. And therefore, Prabhupada says, if you think that you will be able to develop spiritually outside of the association of devotees, you just, you are more or less in delirium. You are in a state of delirium. It's not a realistic proposal. It's completely insane idea of somebody who has immature and unhealthy, painful, diseased ego, and therefore he cannot really properly associate with devotees, and therefore his spiritual problems also are there. So that's another very important point. And one more little addition to this point, which I find very interesting and intriguing. I was reading one book on astrology, quite prominent book, Parashara Horashastra, supposedly written by Parashara Muni. And at the very end, Parashara Muni makes a very beautiful point. He speaks about dependence of our, he identifies the three factors upon which our life of faith is dependent. And out of these three factors, stars or our astrological situation is only one, and not even the main one. Well, he doesn't say which is the main one, which is not the main one. They obviously they all contribute. We are born with certain karma, we are born with certain proclivities, with certain tendencies, innate tendencies in us. It's there. So that's our karma. That's a significant contribution to our, whatever is happening with us, like, some of the members of this esteemed assembly, they were born in the families of devotees. Obviously, it's a very lucky birth. But then he says there are two more factors, which is very interesting and very important for us to understand. He says the second factor is association. you can basically even overrule certain tendencies which you have if you have proper association. Association is extremely formative. Every time we associate with somebody, some influence is there. We have to be really very careful with whom we associate, because every single contact with somebody leaves some impression upon us. It may be not so deep, but it may be deep. So association, it's a very important foundational point of whole Vedic culture, that we have to associate with proper people and be very selective in the way we associate. But then he said there is a third factor which is most interesting. He said the early years of one's development. And I was thinking, why this third factor is there? Is it not covered by the first two? Because you may say that your early years are dependent on your karma, or your early years are dependent on the association which you have. But no, what he wants to say is that any influence which we have in the formative years of our development is crucially important for the development of our personality, of our persona and our life. And we know this. All the psychologists, they talk about childhood traumas and so on and so forth. Why? The answer is very important. Because in the early years, our ego is not developed. Our protective shield is not developed. And therefore, any external influence which we have, we're very vulnerable when we are young and insecure. We're very vulnerable, and any association which we have, any interaction with other people which we have, makes a very lasting and deep impression which we may not even be aware of. These childhood traumas, they may appear because of very insignificant reasons. You may see some spider, and this spider, which somehow or other crawled on you, inflicts such a terror in you and leaves such a lasting impression in your psyche, then, for the rest of your life you will be afraid of spiders. You already know that there is no reason for you to be afraid of spiders, but still, this fear will be totally irrational because of this encounter, which you don't even remember, but the impression is lasting. So again, this is to stress that early years of our spiritual development, when we are little babies, when our spiritual ego is not really formed, when we cannot really distinguish between right and wrong, they are extremely important. And depending on this association in the early period of our spiritual life, it may influence very much our whole devotional career, so to speak. And we can see, devotees, they get most of their spiritual traumas, spiritual childhood traumas, when they are very vulnerable, when their face is kind of weak, and when they are, coming totally disarmed into the society of devotees, and they may encounter with some exploitation, some wrong ideas, this and that. They may be, consciously programmed into certain wrong ideas, like, devotees go to Ritvik camp. I recently spoke with one devotee who spent 17 years in one prominent Ritvik group in India, in Brahmacharya ashram. And he said that the first thing, even before studying Srila Prabhupada books, we study the final order, their explanation why there is no other gurus, the final orders stuff. So that's naturally it will create very deep and lasting impression and will be very formative for the whole spiritual development, because that's the foundation of everything which they do. So that's more or less the short introduction into the whole thing, how it developed and what was there. Now I can come to the crisis point, or yeah, Jai Jagannath Prabhu, you guide me, please.
Yes, Maharaj, if you like. Yeah, this is glorious.
Okay. So again, as I said, there is this developmental psychology which explain what are the typical crises every child has to go through in the process of his development. Let me, yeah. So, and when we compare these crises with the stages of spiritual development listed by Srila Rupa Goswami in his famous Ado Shraddha Tatak Sadhu Sangha Bhajana Kriya, Tato Bhajana Kriya, Anartha Nivriti Syat, and so on and so forth, in these famous 2 verses from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, where Srila Rupa Goswami explains the ladder of devotional service, starting with Shraddha, and then coming to Sadhu Sangha, and then coming to Anartha Nivriti, Bhajana Kriya, Anartha Nivriti, Nishta, Ruchi, and so on and so forth. We can actually very clearly see the stages of development, and the crisis is actually the event which necessarily takes place when you go from one stage to another stage. It is explained by also by Bhaktivinoda Thakur in his Chaitanya Shikshamrita, where he says that in the development, when you go from stage to stage, it may be a dramatic situation, because a lot of things changes. While you're going from stage to stage, your environment changes, your internal perception changes, and the requirement which is there, external requirement which is there, changes. The rules which you are expected to follow also are different. You cannot expect that people on the level of Shraddha will follow the same rules than people on the level of Prema or, Bhava or Ruchi even. So there is a lot of differences, and basically what I suggest in this presentation or in this paradigm is to look on these stages and to see what are the crises which we will have to go through by coming from stage to stage, by climbing on this ladder of spiritual development. Actually, the English word crisis is coming from Greek word, and the Greek word crisis, from which it's being derived, means junction. It does not necessarily mean something bad. It's just the junction or the choice which you have to make. Like you come to a junction and you have the choice whether you go this way or that way. So the crisis is basically, you develop, but then at one point you feel that you have to choose your path, whether you go this way or that way. And sometimes it's very painful, and it's an internal process which manifests externally. And basically, the idea is that if you overcome the crisis, then you come one step closer to Krishna. you climb over this ladder of devotional service. It means basically that you have new stage of your spiritual development. You function differently. Your association is different on this stage. And that's one thing when you overcome the crisis. Another external manifestation that you have overcome the crisis is that you become more integrated internally. When the crisis is there, you feel like you're kind of, disassembled. You're in pieces. You're not so integrated personality. So when you overcome the crisis, you become more integrated, more wholesome personality. Your integrity becomes more. And then another external manifestation, that's of course internal manifestation, but the external manifestation of your successful passing through this crisis is that you become closer to the devotees. You become more integrated externally into the society of devotees. Whereas if you fail the crisis, if you somehow or other don't pass through the crisis, you become less integrated personality, you don't really progress spiritually, and you become alienated from the society of devotees. The extremely totally opposite processes are taking place. And of course, there is a compromise. When externally you move further through some certain external means, like for example, you took a first initiation or you took second initiation. This, by the way, all these initiations, so pranam mantra, all these actions which we do, they symbolize certain level of our spiritual development. They're not just rituals. They actually have to be synchronized and symbolized with our spiritual development, synchronized with our spiritual development. But if we take, let's say, externally, we take the step further, but we didn't really undergo properly the crisis, didn't really pass the critical period properly, then what will happen? Externally, we will be on a higher level, but internally, we will be totally torn apart by unresolved doubts and unresolved problems. And sometimes it happens. People, due to social pressure, they do this, they get pranam mantra, even though they're not ready for this, they get first initiation, second initiation, then sannyas initiation, and then go and get married. So that's all, that's all, that's all a result of this compromise when there is really no resolution in the crisis. Therefore, if we are aware of what's going on internally and what we're supposed to do, what are these external symbolic rituals which we are doing by taking pranam mantra, starting chanting, or taking first initiation and vows, taking second initiation, and so on and so forth, what it really means internally, how to translate it in terms of our internal development, it will help us to do it not in a blind way, but to do it in a more wholesome and healthy way. So that's a little introduction to the crisis idea and what crisis means and why it is so important to understand that there is nothing wrong with crisis. If we develop, if we are living system, if we will have crises. That's not a problem, because the crisis is the sign of our development, is the sign of certain dynamic in our spiritual path. But if we the problem is not the crisis itself. The problem is how we relate to crisis and how we go through the crisis. So that's the most important thing. So let me give the very short overview, because I'm talking already for 1 hour, right?
It's been 45 minutes, Maharaj.
Yes, right, 45 minutes. Yes, right, 45 minutes. Okay. Please let me know when you are totally bored and when you are...
Maharaj, my excitement is only increasing more and more and more. This presentation is very brilliant, actually, and well-timed, I feel like, environmentally.
So I will give you a very short overview, and then we can go into details if you want to go into any details. So if you have some questions, we can answer questions. I can try to answer your questions. So very short overview of the natural processes which we called crises on the path of spiritual development. Of course, to understand very clearly what is going on, we have to also have very clear and profound understanding what are these stages of spiritual development. What exactly is Shraddha? What exactly is Sadhu Sangha? What exactly is Bhajana Kriya? What exactly is Anartha Nivriti? What exactly is Nishtha? I don't try to go any further because this is the most important. This is the early stages of our spiritual development which are foundational for our whole progress in spiritual life. Everything else after Nishtha is more or less, it's smooth, it's not so difficult. But before Nishtha, we really have to climb and work hard. And therefore, I only consider these initial stages of spiritual development. So what is Shraddha? Shraddha basically, it doesn't mean faith. Especially, it doesn't mean faith in Christian sense of the word. It does not mean that you just have to believe in certain practices, you have to believe in certain ideas, you have to believe in certain, figures of the past. Faith, it's very simple. Shraddha, literally Shraddha means respect. Shraddha means, and Prabhupada gives this beautiful definition of Shraddha. He says, Shraddha means appreciation. If you come to devotees and if you appreciate what they're doing, it means you have Shraddha. You don't know anything, you don't have to believe, but you just kind of like what devotees are doing, and you naturally, spontaneously feel the respect towards these people and towards what they are doing. You don't understand, you don't necessarily identify yourself with them. The only little thing which is there on the level of to be qualified as somebody who has Shraddha is this appreciation. It's like little baby, he doesn't have to know anything, he doesn't have to do anything. The only responsibility, quote unquote, of this little baby is to accept his mother, not to reject his mother. Basically, he doesn't know anything, but he kind of naturally, again, spontaneously accepts, respects to a certain extent, as much as you can say that baby respects anyone. But, there is some level of acceptance between the parents and the little baby, and this acceptance is actually called Shraddha. And the Shraddha is the period of nourishment. As much as the little baby, the most what he requires is the nourishment, and he is totally indiscriminate. Little baby, whatever you will give to him, he will just suck it. He will try to take it. But it's good in one sense, and it's also very dangerous, because very easily you can poison this little baby by giving him wrong food. So what is most important on this level of spiritual development, when you are just a little baby and when you're totally vulnerable and totally dependent, the first most important thing is the selfless care of the mother. It is called healthy dependence. The baby should feel from the mother her selflessness. I mean, it's in one sense it's natural for mother to give this selfless love to the baby, but at the same time we know it may not be, not always, unfortunately, nowadays it's so selfless and so unconditional. And much more so, much more true, this statement is much more true for the case of a little spiritual baby, because the first condition of his, properly forming Shraddha is that he has to meet with a devotee who is selfless and unconditional. He has to feel, here is somebody who can give me shelter. Because this is what it is. The first period of our spiritual development is when we take shelter of somebody who is selfless and who is not egoistic, and he is taking care of us. That's the first condition. And the second condition, the food which this person has to give to me has to be very natural. It should not be, milk powder. It should be the breast milk. It should be something genuine. It should be the proper knowledge of the scriptures, not something which he concocted or not some of his speculations. He may be very selfless, he may be very caring, but if he feeds me with something, with the wrong food, my spiritual development will not be good. So these two most important conditions for the first period for us to form Shraddha properly, we have to meet with the devotee, we have to develop faith in him, some sort of trust in him, but to develop this proper trust in him, he has, the proper Shraddha in him, he has to have these two qualities. He has to have knowledge of the Vedas, as much as mother has to have breast milk to feed the baby. So this is what will be the nourishment. And he has to be selfless, he has to give this shelter and this emotional protection to the spiritual baby or spiritual child. And the crisis which we have, this is very interesting. We come to a spiritual movement, we see somebody, we get attracted to somebody, we see somebody who is, who poses himself as a sadhu. We don't have any discrimination, any power of discrimination, really, but we initially feel this initial attraction to the whole process, to the chanting, to the purity of people, to the, generally to people who are there. And the first crisis which we have at this stage, I call the crisis of trust. Because with, like little babies sometimes may feel rejected by the parents, may feel, or if the parents are harsh to him, he will develop mistrust to them. So there will be a crisis initially between acceptance and kind of rejection of sadhu. Satsvarup Maharaj beautifully describes how it was with, in his case with Srila Prabhupada when he first met Srila Prabhupada, and he had, he had double mind. He wanted to accept him, he was attracted to him, but he was not at the same time sure. Certain level of mistrust was there, so he was going back and forth, and then, you know, Prabhupada gave him some grapes. And initially, Satsvarup Maharaj was a little disappointed because he brought a big stack of transcribed dictations of Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada gave him a few grapes in exchange. And he thought, what's going on, you know? I worked hard and I brought it to him. But then, you know, Prabhupada said something. I don't remember exactly this. It's a beautiful story. Satsvarup Maharaj describes it beautifully. But Prabhupada said that something which actually indicated that, you know, it's just a little indication of my love. I will love you anyway, whether you will do it or not, whether you will come to me or not. You know, from my point of view, is the relationship already established and it's totally unconditional. So the moment when Satsvarup Maharaj felt this unconditional love from Srila Prabhupada, his face was formed and his crisis, the crisis of trust was over. You know, because before that he was not really sure what's going on, whether he should take this or not, whether it's the good thing to believe in or not, whether it's good thing to invest your heart, because literally Shraddha means investing our hearts into something. So to overcome this crisis of trust, we need to meet with somebody who really shows that he's unconditional, that he loves us unconditionally, and he's ready to take care of us unconditionally. And of course, he has to show certain level of genuineness in regard to the knowledge which he gives also, and genuineness of his practices and this and that. So that's the first crisis. Prabhupada also, very interestingly, he describes his crisis in this regard. He said, I could not understand Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, but I liked him, he says. I was not convinced at all, but I liked him, and I continued listening to him. And he also says, I noticed that he noticed me, and you know, by by this indication that he is ready to give me shelter, he also developed faith in what Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada is saying. In the beginning, we cannot expect that devotees or people will understand what we are saying. You know, it's all. The only thing which we can expect from them is they should feel that we are something genuine and that we are really taking care of them. So that's the first crisis, the crisis of trust. But then, what is sadhu sangha? The next level of spiritual development, sadhu sangha. Srila Prabhupada says that sadhu sangha, what is the difference between Shraddha and sadhu sangha? Between Shraddha, when you meet with the devotees, and sadhu sangha. Both seems to be the same. What is the difference? No, Prabhupada very clearly explains what sadhu sangha means, and this is also explained by other acharyas. By Bhaktivinoda Thakur in particular. Sadhu Sangha means that you initially get Shraddha, you like people, you respect what they're doing, but at one point you start looking at them as your gurus. This is when you come from the stage of Shraddha to the stage of Sadhu Sangha. Sadhu Sangha, it's not just, I'm coming for last 20 years to the Sunday feast program and, I have sadhu sangha. No. As long as you don't view a particular devotee as your guru, or at least as long as you don't understand that some of these people whom you like and respect eventually should become your gurus, which is very difficult step to do, step forward. You're not in the level of sadhu sangha. Sadhu sangha is when you accept somebody as a spiritual master. But on this stage, to come from Shraddha to sadhu sangha, actually we have this independent nature. And this, what I call, this crisis is the crisis of independence, when we want to protect our independence. We like the society of devotees. We want to be a part of the society of Vaishnavas. But in the beginning, we are very, sensitive, and we don't like if somebody tells us, you should do this, you should do that, because we accept it, or we consider it as an intrusion into our independence, into the borders which we have. And it's actually, we are more or less freelancers on this stage. So coming from Shraddha to the level of sadhu sangha means to accept certain responsibility or certain obligation, and it basically means that now I see there is somebody, and I will accept what he says. And the most beautiful way of explaining this crisis or formulating this crisis is done by Sanjay in Bhagavad Gita. Because in Bhagavad Gita, Sanjay explains what happens with Arjuna when he initially surrenders. He sees Krishna as his spiritual master. This is the Sandhi. We know that there is this verse which is explained, the Bhava Sandhi, when he stops the talk of just a friend, and he accepts Krishna as a spiritual master, and he says, Shishyastiham sadimam tvam prapanam, I'm surrendered, I'm the soul surrendered unto you, I am your disciple. But in the next verse he says, Nayotsya iti Govinda, I am not going to fight, my dear Arjuna. So, my dear Krishna. So that's what it is. That's the crisis. I want to surrender, but I don't want to surrender. I am surrendered soul, but I'm not going to fight. Don't ask me to fight. So that's the crisis. Before that, it was the crisis, Arjuna had severe identity crisis. His ego was demolished. Now he is coming to the spiritual path. And the first thing which he experiences in the spiritual path is again the crisis, because he does not want to lose his independence. He is not really prepared to lose his independence. Coming a little back to the first crisis, there is one interesting thing which I forget to tell you. Very interesting idea. It may not be so prominent in the Western world, but it's very prominent in Russia and in this Slavic world. But I think it's also, to a certain extent, there for Western-minded people, for people with Western mentality. It is a known psychological fact that babies, they consider their parents as mystical figures. For a little baby, his parent is almighty, because he's so big and he's so powerful and he's this and that. So there is a certain element of mythology or mystification, for a little baby, the parent is a mystical figure. He can do miracles. So in the same way, oftentimes for a beginning devotee to develop faith in some sadhu, he needs to show some miracles. To strengthen the faith of a devotee, he needs to show some miraculous display of, and if he doesn't show these miracles, then the devotee starts imagining all these miracles. Oh, he just, he read my thoughts, or he's just, he's such a miracle man. Very often, when you speak with the beginner devotees, when they speak about the spiritual masters, they started exaggerating and saying he's such a mystic. He has to be a mystic, because otherwise I cannot believe in him. Because I don't have proper foundation, proper discrimination. I don't know how to believe in him, what to trust, what not to trust. Therefore, I tend to mystify the figure of a spiritual master or of a sadhu. And actually, the failure of this crisis is that when we imagine something, we mystify the figure of a spiritual master, and then, we devalue. In the beginning, we idealize sadhu, and then we devalue sadhus. This is what happens oftentimes. People come and they idealize sadhus, they idealize devotees. They think they should be totally, completely ideal. And then, they meet something different, and they didn't develop proper faith, because the proper faith is the faith in Shastra. The proper sadhu has to take his responsibility, or see his responsibility to develop faith of a devotee in a proper way in Shastra. There is a beautiful story. I think Pushta Krishna Prabhu tells this story about Prabhupada. He says, Prabhupada, I trust only you. I don't trust anyone else. Only you are a pure devotee. You saved me. You this, you that. And Prabhupada, he looks at him and smiles, and he says, don't trust me. I may fail you. I may let you down. Trust in Krishna. So this is what is very important on this level of spiritual development, to help the devotee to place his heart in a proper way, in a proper place. Shraddha means placing the heart in a proper place. So as soon as possible. Initially, you cannot expect it from devotee, but it's very important. And that's exactly what Prabhupada was doing. He was instilling faith in Shastra, in his followers. He was not creating the personality cult out of himself like some other sadhus. He was always saying, Shastra, 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 Shastra. This is how he was developing the faith. And therefore, this second crisis, when devotees had to develop faith in a particular sadhu as a guru, was very smooth at that time. It was very natural. Devotees, really, it was easily for them, because of so much trust in Prabhupada, they can easily relinquish their independence. So when you go from Shraddha to Sadhu Sangha, it symbolically means that you take pranam mantra, because you already have Shraddha and you already decided that this particular sadhu will be your guru, will be your guide, spiritual guide, and you trust him, and symbolically you take pranam mantra. And pranam mantra basically means that you successfully overcame the crisis of trust. You already, ideally, you know who is this person, you know what is his teaching, you know that he is genuine, you know that he is trying to teach you Shastra, and you don't idealize him, you don't make a mystical figure out of him, and it means that you will not devalue him later on because you will be able to appreciate what he has to give. He has to give you Shastra, he is giving Shastra, so what's the problem? Even if he is not a miracle man, he is still genuine. So then, you know, on the level of this, if you inevitably, you chant your pranam mantra, you know that this person is my guru, but still you want to protect your independence. You don't want him to say to you something yet. You're not ready to accept any of his, you know, orders or whatever. So then you have this crisis of your independence. Sometimes, like little children, when they grow little up, you know, they, you tell them something and they say, no, I want to do it myself. They start feeling this initial, you know, ego trip is there, you know, I will do it myself. So don't tell me doing this. So that's the next level of problem which we may have, and that's when you done with this crisis, when you pass this crisis, when you really trust this person so much that you are ready to accept his order or his order and do what he says because you trust him and because you know, he is genuine and this and that, then only you should take first initiation. If you don't have this level of trust and if you still not really completely, I know myself, you know, some devotees took initiation and I know that, you know, they're not on this level, they should not do it. You know, they're not really ready to do it. They're just doing it under some sort of social pressure because, you know, the temple president tells them, you know, you get initiation, everyone tells them so many years, but they still want to maintain their independence. They are not really, you know, ready to relinquish the independence. So that's the first initiation, and first initiation means bhajana kriya. Bhajana kriya means you perform regular devotional service in the society of devotees. On the first stage of your spiritual development, you only take shelter. That's the only thing which you actually learn to take shelter of the devotees. You learn to trust them. That's the main gist or the main essence of this Shraddha level. On the second stage of spiritual development, your sadhu sangha, your duty or your responsibility is to learn the language. As much as the little baby, when he starts, you know, developing a little bit, he starts repeating the words of the sadhus, of their parents. He starts speaking like parents. You know, that's a very important stage of spiritual development. We don't know anything, but we repeat the words of sadhus, you know, sometimes very mechanically, sometimes improperly. So we learn the language, we learn the terms, and it's on the stage of sadhu sangha, it's very important to learn the basic terms, what it means, what Krishna means, what sadhu sangha means, what Shraddha means. All these definitions are there, what bhakti means, what pure devotional service means. These definitions are very important because, you know, otherwise you will not really understand the language or you will not properly communicate with the sadhus. So that's on the level of sadhu sangha, you learn how to speak. On the level of bhajana kriya, you learn how to act as a devotee. On the level of Shraddha, you learn how to trust the devotees and proper way of trusting devotees, what we should trust. On the level of sadhu sangha, we learn how to speak as a devotee. So on the level of bhajana kriya, we learn how to act as a devotee, how to chant, how to go to Mangalarati, how to, perform Harinam Kirtan on the street, how to preach, how to distribute. Like little children, they start doing this, learning this from. And on this stage of spiritual development, it's very important to have peer association. Without this, there will be no development. In the beginning, you don't need so much peer association because you're totally, entirely dependent on the association with elevated people who are like your parents. But on this stage of your spiritual development, you need peers because you learn from them a lot, and you do something together with them, and they become your teachers as well, not only the senior people. But this stage of bhajana kriya is a very interesting stage. I'm already speaking too long, so let me wrap it up quickly. So bhajana kriya, there is a lot of crises on the level of bhajana kriya. Basically, the 6 stages of anishtita bhajana kriya, which Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur mentions in Madhurya Kadambini, is a description of different crises which the devotee has on the level of bhajana kriya. But if we take, it's a separate subject matter to reformulate these stages of spiritual development according to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur from the point of view of a modern bhakti practitioner. What does it really mean? It's entirely possible, but it's a separate subject matter. Interesting, but we will not fit it into this limited time frame. But the essence of this crisis of this stage is very, very important. Please listen, because it's the most relevant for us as practicing devotees. What happens on the stage of bhajana kriya, anishtita bhajana kriya, before anartha, nivriti and nishta, we practice the devotional service, but we don't have the genuine taste in it. We don't have profound taste in chanting. We don't have, of course, we have profound taste in taking prasadam. That's the taste which we definitely have. So, but besides that, we may not have very developed taste in reading books. We may not have taste in chanting, japa individual. We may not have taste in going to Mangalarati. We may not have taste in any other regulated devotional service, starting with Shravanam, Kirtanam, Smaranam, and Padasevanam, and Archanam, and so on and so forth. But as Prabhupada says beautifully, that we are all pleasure-seeking living entities. Human being, and not only human being, any spirit soul is the pleasure-seeking living entity. So we don't have the genuine spiritual taste on this level because our material engrossment is too deep. We cannot really feel the ananda, the bliss of spirit, because we are too engrossed in matter. But we are still doing it out of necessity because we took this responsibility. So what will happen on this stage? We try to derive the taste from something else. And pretend that this is the spiritual taste. So on this stage of spiritual development, which is most important and most, most of the devotees, they are on this stage of spiritual development, on this anishtita bhajana kriya. Like some devotees derive taste from being glorified as big preachers. They don't have taste for, for preaching really, but they have taste for being glorified. Some devotees that derive taste from having so many followers. They don't have genuine spiritual taste, but they feel a lot of taste, that because they have so many followers. Some devotees, they develop some taste in some other things, some other external things, because we need some taste and we don't have genuine spiritual taste, we substitute the taste. This is the crisis of this substitution of taste. And because we substitute the taste, what happens, our goal, nominally, ex officio, we say, my goal is love of God. But really, my goal is to have followers. My goal is to have fame, name, glory, to be glorified as a very scholarly devotee or very pakka devotee, fixed up devotee, or very varnashrama, dharmic, or whatever, I don't know, whatever you call it. So the real goal which we have on this stage is not really, Krishna Prema. It's always very hilarious when devotees in the temple, after Mangalarati, they repeat all the 10 offenses, and then at the end they say, any practicing devotee should carefully avoid committing these offenses while chanting, and in this way very quickly achieve the goal, Krishna Prema, and they they all repeat it, and it sounds very unconvincing. It's not really. I always felt there is something wrong in this habit which we have. So, if we consider this anishtita bhajana kriya, starting with this utsahamai. What is utsahamai? Utsahamai, you're very enthusiastic. Why you're so enthusiastic? Because everything is new, because everything is fresh, because you feel superior to others, because others are dirty karmis and you know the higher truths. And this is all the causes of your total infatuation or your your initial neophyte enthusiasm. It's not the genuine spiritual enthusiasm which will develop later on the stage of Nishtha, but it's initial enthusiasm which is very flickering, and you want to maintain this artificial sort of thing, but then it vanishes, and then you go to the stage of Ganatarala, and sometimes you're very enthusiastic, sometimes you're not very enthusiastic, sometimes somebody says to you which you don't like, and you seriously consider to give up this association of devotees because they're all bad, and then somebody says something good to you and glorifies you, and you again seriously consider to join this Krishna consciousness movement because they are such a nice people, and so on and so forth. It's going on. So that's basically the crisis of the substitution of goal when we have the false goals and the crises of lack of spiritual taste. That's what it is. We have the internal conflict because officially we accepted Krishna as the goal of our endeavors. But in reality, we don't want to go to him. We just want to stay here more or less and enjoy here because this is the taste which we have. We know this taste. We don't have other taste. And therefore, we become fanatical in the beginning. This utsahamai is the initial fanaticism. And then we become ritualistic. We just mechanically do some rituals. We become hypocritical, and so on and so forth. So that's the crisis on the stage of bhajana kriya. And very quickly I will say the last thing about anartha nivriti thing. You know, if you overcome this, it basically means that you passed anishtita bhajana kriya, you're more or less past anartha nivriti, you're ready to come to nishta stage. But before coming to nishta stage, you have to overcome one more crisis. Because in the last stage of your anishtita bhajana kriya, you became a great devotee. You became very respected in the society of devotees. You have many followers. Everyone calls you Maharaj. Everyone bows down to you. And you enjoy this position. This is what Tarangarangini means. You become the leader. You become powerful. You are, everyone respects you because this is what Bhakti does. You really develop certain level of stability, but you're still enjoying these material things because you're not yet capable of enjoying spiritual things. You didn't develop your spiritual ego to a proper level. You're not yet capable of getting spiritual taste because your ego is still immature, spiritual ego. And but before coming to the stage of nishta, if you want to go further, you have to destroy this false, quote-unquote, spiritual persona which you developed. You developed certain pseudo-spiritual identity. Everyone respects you, everyone thinks you're a pure devotee, everyone is really, trying to surrender to you. So you cannot come to the stage of nishta with this, with this crap. No way. Because nishta means trinada pisanichinata arura pisahishna. Nishta means I'm nobody. Nishta means I am tiny, little, insignificant, spiritual neophyte who doesn't have even genuine spiritual taste. And Krishna will help you to destroy this. There will be something in your life which will, some critical situation which will destroy your spiritual. You may commit some obvious sinful activity, because and everyone will start, disrespecting you, or saying that you're a hypocrite, this and that, or something like this. And it may become, it may be very important stage of your spiritual development, because this is the help of Krishna for you to become more genuine, to come to the stage of nishta when you are really humble and really, tolerant, and you're ready to respect anyone and don't want to accept any respect from other people. So this is a very painful crisis, extremely painful crisis, where your whole pseudo spiritual persona identity crumbles, and when you have to go through this very painful transformation, becoming really genuine, humble servant of Vaishnavas and deriving taste in this service, not in anything extraneous or external to this. So, but then it means that you passed this, you are on the level of Nishtha, and voila, you are on a very stable platform from which you will be able to develop further. So that's a short overview. I'm speaking, I mean, not so short, but an overview. So, you know, I don't know what we will do. I'm already speaking 1.5 hours.
Maharaj, how much time do you have? We don't want to impose on your time also.
I only have till 6:30 because at 6:30 there is one lesson which I am taking.
Is that, I'm in...
6:30 means 15 more minutes.
15 more minutes, okay. So we can ask questions. I just want to say personally, Maharaj, there's so much profundity in this presentation. My mind's blown. At certain parts of it, I was practically almost in tears, and I was just reflecting on what you're describing in my own journey in Krishna consciousness. It's very, it was profound. Just thank you for that. I've been around for almost 20 years, and I've been hearing your lectures since the beginning. My first lecture with you was Anavritti Shabda seminar, and which I come to periodically throughout the years, again and again. So I've been appreciating you for many, many years now in my spiritual life, and just very happy to be in your presence. I wanted to say, I'll kick it off, and then it looks like Vino Kovida has a question. These crises, you spoke of the crises of trust, and obviously I've been around for 20 years, so I've gone through that, but I feel like I've gone through that many times throughout my 20 years. And in other words, not like just at this particular stage, but I feel like I've been repeatedly experiencing the crises of trust. Of course, when I first joined, I wasn't getting the pure breast milk. I was getting a lot of milk powder. But I had a strong attraction to scripture from the very outset. I would study 4 to 6 hours every day, just trying to get acquainted. So that was there. And then finally, someone came into my life who seemed shastrically endowed. I developed trust in this particular individual, but he had a way of speaking that broke faith and guru. I had already been initiated at that time by Sri Radha Maharaj. And it kind of looked like experientially that he was kind of building a personality cult around him. Just saving the details, that's what it kind of translated into in Chicago. Some of the devotees here know this experience. And so I ended up asking him, about his own relationship with his guru, and he broke the relationship with me immediately because I was having a crisis of trust. You want us to put faith in you, but you don't seem to have faith in your superiors. So when he broke the relationship immediately, I was thrown again into another crisis of trust, which made me develop that's it. I'm only gonna put my head in scripture. It's very hard to trust who is being genuine from the sadhus. I was like that for about, 5 years, and then I ran into Satyanarayan Das Babaji. And right at the period when I was kind of getting kicked out of the ashram after 13 years, and I kind of confided in him and complained about various things, and he didn't take advantage of that. He never criticized ISKCON, he never criticized any of my gurus. So I developed trust in him, and he treated me very affectionately, and so I developed a trusting relationship with him, and which was even noted by many of his disciples with whom I'm friends with. But then later, a couple of years after taking a lot of his association, when I would go to Vrindavan, because he's in a different parivar, and he reinitiates devotees from ISKCON, amongst other things. I was advised by my own guru, Sri Radha Goswami, to not spend so much close time. And because I'm a disciple, I just followed that also. But I experienced turmoil because of having an affectionate relationship with this sadhu. I was getting trust, I was getting the breast milk, shastri. And then to be told not to do that, and I followed it happily also because I have a lot of faith in my own guru also. So I did follow that, but I still feel like the reverberations of the schism that was created because of the breaking, the having to like break something that I felt trust was coming. So anyway, that's a quick overview of my like sort of outline. I feel like I've been going through this crisis of trust so much in my 20 years, and I don't know if you have any feedback or any. I don't know how are you hearing this? What would you say to me?
Yeah, thank you very much for asking this question. See, there's a lot to say, but the main point, see, the saving grace which you had and which I had, this experience of unconditional love, which is most important. If we experience the unconditional love of somebody, if we experience shelter, that somebody is really ready to give us shelter, and feeds us with some proper food which we require. So, like the baby, when he is brought up with a lot of love in the very initial stages, he is much more protected. He may experience some betrayals during his life and this and that, but he will be still more protected because he has this protective shield. He got these vitamins in the very beginning, and these vitamins and nourishment which he got from certain personalities give him protection. So this sort of story which you told, actually you did have protection from your relationship with your guru, and then you wanted to have some more nourishment, which is natural. I mean, when the baby grows, he explores different things. He wants to explore the world. He wants to explore this and that, and he wants to take shelter of somebody else. But because you knew that, there is somebody whom you really trust, you could overcome other relationship which may be not so healthy or partially healthy, so it didn't affect you because from the inception you had protection, basically. And if you're protected, then you can enter into relationship. Like you mentioned Satyanarayana Das Babaji. I like him very much. I listen some of his lectures. Whenever I have chance, I go to him, I speak with him. But at the same time, there is certain distance which I don't cross. Because again, I know certain things which I may not agree, but it doesn't bother me. I can take something good from him, and I will not take something which is not healthy for me as a member of this particular society or this particular parivar. I will not take very seriously some of his statements. With all my respect, I respect him very much. He is definitely somebody whom I view as very, as a genuine philosopher who knows Shastra and everything else. So, but because I am protected, I can filter out something which I don't need. I can really, distinguish between something, and I can only extract which I need and be nourished from this relationship as well. This relationship will become very helpful in my life, and it will not create any destruction or does not destroy my faith, even though he may say something which I don't like, if I was little more vulnerable, it would be threatening for my faith. But it doesn't threaten my faith because I'm not vulnerable, because I feel certain protection.
Well, thank you, Naresh. As always. We know Kavita, Prabhu wants to say something. Harisham's got a question. That may be all we have time for, given the limitation here. We know Kavita, Prabhu?
Can you turn on your camera? I can hear you, but it would be good if you turn on your camera.
Just 1 minute there. Okay, how's that?
Yes, we can see you now.
Hare Krishna. So thank you again. I really, really appreciate this seminar, Maharaj. I also heard part of your seminars in ILS this past, just before COVID. And I can very much relate with the analogy of a child and our spiritual life being like that. So I really appreciate that. And one of the questions I had when you were sharing was about in the early stages, sorry, I'm just drawing a blank because I was just running. So you were sharing that about how the early stages. We need to hear from someone very clear. Basically, sadhu sangha is important at all stages. And I'm just reflecting on my experience of ISKCON specifically in the US. And mainly my experiences are there are many very senior devotees and very sincere devotees because they have been, ISKCON in the US has been around for relatively longer than, the longest. That's where it started. So there's a benefit of some very experienced devotees. And then at the same time, there is like this huge infrastructure that was created when we had like hundreds of devotees in every temple, and then it was collapsed. And so what we see, and what I've experienced is that many of the temples there are senior devotees, there are mature devotees, there are serious devotees. They're trying their best to, give the breast milk and give sincere association, but they have so much pressure for just maintaining. And it's almost like using your analogy, it's like having a single mother who has to raise like 4 kids. Like she's really caring and she's giving her breast milk, but she's just like she can't avoid these kids facing trauma. And so I'm just wondering if you can comment on this and maybe give some guidance, because it's been a question of mine, what is the actual real association? Is it just having senior devotees around? Because a lot of times there will be senior devotees around, but there's not much quality katha happening. And how do we? I'm just been puzzled of how to kind of deal with this in the situation in the U.S.
I guess it's more or less like this everywhere, because we have this burden of love which Srila Prabhupada left to us, and there is a lot of institutional concerns, and sometimes institutional concerns overshadow the most important thing, which is spiritual relationship. And there is all this missionary spirit, this and that. So it may not be necessarily specifically US situation. I think it's more or less the same. Like in US, you have many senior devotees who are busy. In other places, you don't have even many senior devotees, and those who are there, they're even more busy. So it's everywhere like this, in different ways, but it's a similar thing. But at the same time, we have advantage. This is a disadvantage, obvious. In a more classical scenario, in a more traditional scenario, you have a young boy coming to a sadhu, and sadhu has maybe 2-3 disciples with him, and he's there 24 hours a day for this young devotee, and he's Mahabhagavata. Fine. We don't have this. We may have devotees who are busy, who have other responsibilities, this and that, but we have some other advantages. We can always listen to their lectures. It's like this. If you establish a relationship, it's one thing, when somebody speaks and you just listen his lecture. It's one thing. It's another thing if somebody speaks to you. Like I'm speaking to you now, and it's different. I'm interacting with you, I see your reactions, this and that. So some sort of a subtle connection is established by this interaction. And if this connection is established by this interaction, then you can get nourishment through this channel, which will be very personalized and what you need. If you just listen some impersonal lecture from some, very good lecture from some very good teacher, but you're not sure whether he cares about you or not, whether he knows about your existence or not, then it's one thing. It may give you little nourishment, but it will not give you a lot of nourishment. But if you establish this initial contact, and you know that this person cares about you and he really is concerned about you and your well-being, even though he may be busy, he may be far away, he may be traveling, he may be doing this or that, still, by listening to him, you will, through this channel of established personal relationship, you will still get some proper nourishment for your development. This is what I would say. And we should not underestimate it. It's there, it's possible, like sometimes people say, oftentimes people say, I have some question, and, disciples of mine, they say, I have some questions, I want to write to you, but then, I turn on your lecture on YouTube or somewhere, and you exactly answer my question, as if you knew it. So, why? Because it only happens because there is this connection. And through this connection, the super soul is also acting. When we have disciple and guru relationship, we should not forget that it's always a triangle. It's not just guru-disciple relationship. There is a third party involved, that's super soul. So if you try to, strengthen this relationship by your service and by your sincere humility and obedience and this and that, then even though the person may be far away, you will still get the nourishment and help from this person through some, through different means. So that's what I would say. Like also, Prabhupada, he said, I only met my Guru Maharaj 5 times in my life. He didn't have much profound association with him, but because the connection was so strong and it was so firmly established, then he was still getting a lot of, energy through this connection. So that's what I would say. So take advantage of what you have, and I think it will be.
Thank you so much, Maharaj. It's already, I guess, 6:03 where you're at. So it's a little past time, so we'll have to stop here. I do have this question. That original seminar that you gave, is there a way that we could get access to that so that we can sit with these ideas more? And
yeah, I think so. I can find out where it is. It should be. I have this. I'll ask if it's there on my YouTube channel. I have English YouTube channel and I have Russian YouTube channel. Of course, most of my lectures are in Russian.
yeah. I'll ask. We'll ask Shakti Avesh Avatar Maharaj. You know what's
Ask him. Ask him. He must know. Ask him.
Thank you so much, Maharaj. Just being in your presence is just ecstatic, and hearing you speak today has been extremely profound. Devotees are here in the chat box, and the part 2, just a Q&A to flesh out some of these ideas. Maybe if possible, Dave Madhava can see if such a possibility is there. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your time with us and your wisdom.
Sure, I can come again. We establish some relationship maybe sometime in the future. Whatever I'm here. I'm still here.
Haribo.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you, Maharaj, so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Gauranga.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Blessings.